Hello everyone, this is Evo64 Man. Today I'd like to talk about eprom ROM management, particularly as it applies to the new Evo64, but certainly the concepts can also apply to making multi-ROMs for other systems as well, or other adapters. It's really the same process. And I'd like to talk about the tools that I've been using recently, which are a little bit different than the ones in the past that I used, and I think that would be useful information for folks. This is the latest piece of retro gear that I have received. I'm very fortunate to be one of the beta testers for the Evo64 really exciting board that some folks have reviewed out there. This is actually not the latest version, or this is not the production version. This is the a beta version, that prototype. And as you can see, the YouTube module is still wired in, with separate wires, and the actual production version, that's now a header, and it's much neater and better connection as well. Also, I don't know Klingon. I know people say the Kapla. I prefer French, so I'm going to say le Quapla. It's now socketed, the PLA. So I think that's a great improvement as well. But in any case, one of the things that has come up with the Evo is the idea of ROM management. And most folks out there, you're familiar, you have built your ROM adapters, and you have built other boards that provide you with extra kernels, or extra basics, extra character sets, that kind of a thing. So the process is well known, and in fact, there's some great great videos out there. In fact, let me see if I can pull up a video here, or just show you a link. Okay, this is Jan Beta's really nice video that he did on making a Commodore Max multicart. And although it's for a Commodore Max, really the process is very similar of adding together all these kernels and basic and character ROMs. And also, in this case, games, because the Commodore Max was a game machine. And interestingly, that also applies to the Evo, because the Evo ROM, Master ROM, can handle having games as well. And I'm going to show you that a little bit later. But one of the normal ways that people do that is by using, DOS line, basically a command line interface, using DOS, and using the copy command with the /B in binary mode. And basically just adding together all the ROM files that you want to combine. And that works pretty well. As you can see, Jan here is doing exactly that up in this window on his screen. And that works well if you're doing 8 kernels, or maybe a few basics and a few character sets. However, when you start getting into very large ICs that can hold a lot of info, that becomes a little bit less practical to do this command line, I think, because ultimately you probably have to do it in a multi-step version, add all your kernels together into one file, add maybe all the basics together, and maybe then all the character sets, and then combine those files. So it becomes a little convoluted and a little bit more difficult to deal with, I think. So I've been kind of exploring some new tools to do that, and that's what I'd like to show you folks. Now, there's another way, of course, to do this, and that is to use the actual software that does the EPROM burning. In this case, the XG Pro for the TL866 2 Plus, which is the item right here. Yeah, right here on the corner. So you can see that. So how would you do that? Well, that's actually, you know, fairly easy to do. In fact, this is loaded with something, so I'm going to clear, so there's nothing there. Okay, so the process for doing that, and by the way, this is described in detail in the Evo documentation, and you can certainly do it this way, and I've actually done it this way for many times. So basically, you would browse to load your file that you want to load. Let's say your first kernel, and then, okay, so here's my first kernel, and I'm going to load that into 000, buffer start address right here, 000. And note the clear buffer with default. In this case, it's fine because the EPROM is empty. So, okay, so now, as you can see, I've loaded the first kernel in there, right? Whatever you want to load, you know, in this case, it's the default Commodore 64 kernel, but you know, you can, if you have a license, you can do Jiffy DOS or Jaffe DOS or any of the other ones, Speed DOS, etc. But you notice starting at 2000, there's nothing there, right? Okay, so in this case, what we would do is we would load file again, and we would go over and browse now to the new file. In this case, let's say this is the second kernel right here. And I'm going to open that, but there's an important change you need to make. First, you need to change the buffer start address, as we know, to 2000, right? Okay. And then you really need to make sure that the clear buffer with default is off, is disabled, because otherwise you'll overwrite, you know, what you just did. And that can be very frustrating if you've done 15 of these ROM files and you get to the last one and you forget to set that setting, and start all over again, or, you know, save often, right? Okay, so anyway, there we go. So now I just loaded into, you can see the 2000 area is taken up. And if we scroll all the way down to the 4000, you'll see that that's all FF, you know, that's all empty, we hope. Yeah, here it is. Okay. All right. So I could go through this process and add all these files together. There's no problem with that. That'll work. You know, whether it works faster than the command line, probably not, but you know, you do get to see the code, which is really cool. Okay. So, and that's useful. But both of those processes, I think, are kind of possibly not the best way to do it when you're doing with multiple files. And by multiple files, you know, for example, the Evo right off the bat here will start with 8 kernels and 4 basics and another 8 character sets. Okay, so right there you have 20 files to deal with. Now, it also has a capability of loading, let's say, some diags. Let's say 8 different diags, you know, the Commodore diags, 1541 diags, etc. So now you're up to 28, let's say, right? If I'm adding that correctly. Oh, and then let's add some games on top of that, some 8K games. So now, let's say 8 of those. Now we're up to 36 files. So you can see as this increments, and it actually can load a lot more, because then you can load another, let's say, another 16K games on the next bank up, provided your EPROM is large enough. So, because the Evo can handle up to a 2 meg EPROM. So that can get really unwieldy with that many files. So I hunted around for a GUI tool to do this with, and actually found 2. And one is very, very simple. The downside of the first tool, well, let me show you the tool. It's called File Joiner. And it is freeware, and the author is Igor. And this does, as you can see by the screenshot there, and actually I think I have this loaded here. Let me load this up, and we'll go back. Here we go. And I'll bring it up on screen. Yeah. Okay. So basically you just have a window that you can add your files to right there, or add folder. I do add files because it helps me to keep them alphabetically and kind of see what's going on, but you can certainly use the add folder. I would point out, if you use this tool, you probably want to go into settings and uncheck the sort by using last number in file path. Even though that's faster, it's negligible because we're dealing with small files. So by unchecking that, I think it gives you actually a little bit better control of alphabetics, considering that Windows is not the most wonderful system at keeping things alphabetically. If you have 1, or you might have 1 0 after that, or then 2. Yeah, you guys know what I mean. But in any case, and there's of course workarounds that, but unchecking that makes this a little bit easier to deal with. So I can go to add files. Now, the important thing, and I actually forgot to mention this, is before you do anything else, I think it's wise to organize all the kernels you're going to use in one directory, all the basic ROMs you're going to use in another directory, the character ROMs, and in this case you can see the diags, and let me just walk through those. Okay, so there's the kernel ROMs. This happens to be the Commodore 64 default ROM 8 times, and I've done it with different color combinations so that I can tell depending on the memory area that it loads to in the EPROM. In other words, I want to be able to see, what's loaded into 00 from what's loaded into 2000 and then 4000, etc. So I edited, and in fact, let me see here. I edited the ROM to have a different color scheme, and that's all widely available out there on the internet. For example, the code, the disassembly for all the ROMs, and this is actually the website, and I'll put links in these in the video so you guys don't have to hunt around for the small writing in here. But anyway, there's also some great YouTube videos. For example, Arctic Retro here did a video where he puts his title on top of the ROM there, and and other folks have messed around with customizing their ROMs and for their purposes. I would say though, however, it's wise not to mess with the original ROMs in a production type of scenario, and because you just never know when a checksum is going to be present in a program or something that may affect compatibility. I haven't run into that, but the possibility is always there. So what you're about to see is purely for test purposes. The editing I've done to this ROM for my own personal use is just to be able to test to make sure that indeed everything is loading into the proper area of the ROM where it should. Okay, so going back to Igorware, to FileJoiner, let's pull that up again, and it's wise to make a directory for each of these types of ROMs. Okay, so those are the kernels. I have my basics here. By the way, I prefer to using 0 through 7 and 0 through 3 instead of 1 through 4 or 1 through 8. That's just a personal preference because it happens to match up better with the dip switch settings in binary, and you'll see that when we get there. So it's a little bit you don't have to subtract 1 all the time. So those are the basic ROMs. Some examples of character ROMs that are out there for the Commodore 64. And then your typical diags, maybe a couple versions of the C64 diag, the 586220, the one with the star, maybe the one with the plus plus, because people may prefer one or the other. A keyboard utility, another diag. Actually, a lot of folks aren't familiar with the Rossmuller diag, but it does require a different harness, but it's actually an excellent diag as well. And the C64 diag, maybe a SID test, some tools, and Yanni's World, the 1541 test diag as well. So that would be a possibility for diags, and then maybe just some games that you have, So, I just added a few of these here to test. These are 8K games, and where's the 8K? Yeah, let's move the size over to there so we can, not that far. Go back. Okay, right there. Thank you. Close enough. And that fills out the ROM that I have. So let's go ahead and use this tool, File Joiner, to do this. And then I'll show you another tool, which I actually think is even a little bit better, to do the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and add files, and I'm going to start with the kernels. So basically, I just select all the kernels, and you can see them right here. Now, one unfortunate thing about this program is I'm not able to resize this window, which I'd like. But there we go. Okay, there we are. So let's add more files. So we did the kernels. Now let's go ahead and add the basics on top of that. And let's add, as you can see, this is pretty quick, I'll cut and basically paste. Just highlight all those guys. Now we got all the kernels. All the character sets, rather. So we should be able to see them all there, organized alphabetically. And okay. This amount would be 8 kernels, 4 basics, and 8 character sets. But because the Evo can hold so much more on the EPROM, let's go ahead and add some diags as well. So I'm going to add all the 8 diags right there. Okay. And now those should be at the bottom right there. Yep. There's the diags. Finally, I'm going to add the games. And there we go. So at this point, I should have every single ROM that I want to put into that master ROM for the Evo. Okay. And the only thing I need to do is it gives you the default of the first file that you loaded as a final file, and we're going to change that, of course. So, okay. So I wanted to show you the directory so you can actually see this being written in real time. So as a recap, so we do have all the files there that we need. And at this point, we've renamed the file to the correct name that we want to use. And we just click the join button down here. And it's literally that fast. And there they are. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. By the way, there's an option to not clear the screen at the end of the file join. So if you didn't like the way it came out, instead of adding everything back together again, you can just move things around, or using the arrow keys, or edit or delete a file, substitute another one in, that kind of a thing. So that is completely possible. But I'm going to go ahead and close that. So actually, yeah, I forgot. It's I'm using the 256K EPROM, so not the 512. I think the Evo is going to come with a 512 though, which is twice as much. So I really do need to rename that, just so it doesn't create confusion. Okay, there we go. We'll make sure we'll name the second one correctly. Okay, so that was it. That's as fast as it is to add all those together. Now, obviously we need to load them and burn the EPROM, and I'll show you that in a second. But let me go ahead and show you the second tool that I think is very promising. Okay, this next tool, and my favorite tool actually, is HXD, well-known hex editor and disk editor. But it has a couple options that just, I think, make it indispensable for ROM management. And let me pull it up and kind of show you what I mean by that. And interestingly enough, it's not under the file menu. The options I'm talking about are under tools. And if you go under file tools right here, these two options, concatenate and split. So I use that all the time. Concatenate, of course, does exactly what we just did in the other piece of software. It lets us take the individual ROM kernels and files and combine them all into one master file. But the split option is exactly the opposite. If you have a multi-ROM that you built, and let's say there's a new version of a diag utility you want to substitute or something like that, well, you can split it back up into the individual components. The interesting thing is, just to show you the split real quick, how that works, is you would include the file there. Let's say I'll just pick any file in here. And then you'd give it a base name. And then here's the tricky part. You need to set the amount of, in this case, it's mostly 8K, which becomes a little tricky because in that master file I also have 4K files in there, right? The character sets. So you might have to do it individually, or do one pass to do all the 8K files. And then just split out in the 4K files and do those and split them out as 4s. But that split option is very, very useful. But we're going to actually do the opposite. So we're going to repeat the process of what we just did. So we're going to add together. Here we go. So file list. Click add, and let's go to ROMs, and let's start with our kernels. So I'm going to quickly do exactly the same thing, and then we go to ROMs, go to basics, open those, click add again. Do the character ROMs. And hopefully I don't skip any. Do the diags. And finally do the games. Okay, and hopefully we should have them all in here. Now this window does resize, fortunately, which is a nice option. And what's great about this is you can move things around too in order with the green arrows right here. So if you decide you want to move one thing in front of the other for whatever reason. So this is a kind of, I think, a nicer display. All right, so for our output file name, we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to call it Evo256K ROM2 bin in this case. And I'm going to save it. I don't think that window, there it is. And click OK. Alrighty. So let's pull up. There it is. Okay. So now we have two 256K master files. They should be identical, even though they were done on two different programs. You know, I'm going to do this on the fly. It'll be interesting if they're not, but they should be. I mean, unless I did something wrong. I'm actually going to highlight both and go ahead and let me see. Click on, I have a program installed called WinMerge. That's another one of those free utilities. And we're going to open it up with, with WinMerge, which actually is an excellent program because you can see the code for both files. And in this case, it tells me, as we expect, that the selected files are identical, which is great. That's always a good sign. There's no corruption or anything. And if we scroll through them all the way to the bottom, we can see there's no, if they were different, you'd see some yellow or other color in both sides of the screen. Yeah, this is a really nice piece of software. Great for comparing two different versions of files, that kind of stuff. All sorts of applications for that. Okay, you'll notice I turned the machine off, the Evo64 off, and at this point I'm going to go ahead and pull the ROM loaded into the EPROM. There we go. And let's fire up. There we go. The XG Pro EPROM burning software. In this case, I have it set. You have to set it to the correct EPROM that you're using. I believe for the Evo64, it actually may come with a different EPROM. I believe it's one of those, the AM29F040B. They're both DIP32, so dual inline package. But in this case, I'm using this one. It's half the size of the other one, just for demonstration purposes. The process is exactly the same. And I am going to go, and we do have, it's still remembering what I loaded before when I brought this up, so I'm actually going to clear everything. So what we're going to do is load the new file, do this the right way, which is here. We use the first one, and there it is. And because it's an entire file now, I can leave all the options in the default 000 address range, and also the clear buffer. So I'm going to go ahead and load that. We should be able to verify that the entire EPROM is filled all the way to the end. It is all the way to 40,000 actually. And at this point, let's go ahead and program it. It goes pretty quick, in just a couple minutes. And it's verifying. And it succeeded. Okay. So we can pull. In fact, let me, there we go. We can pull the file. I did forget one minor detail. Actually, let's do it right here. There. Okay. Now we can handle the EPROM a little more safely. And we'll go ahead and place it in there. And hopefully, let's switch over to the master display. Okay, and we're back where we started. There it is. Let me bring up this screen and explain a little bit. There we go. So what I've done for, and again, this is just for demonstration purposes, is I've edited the basic ROM just so I could see all the different options, you know, where they go in the EPROM location address. So what I did here is, this is the first ROM, or ROM 0, and it's loaded at address 0000, and these three numbers right here tell me what the dip switch settings are for the actual, I guess I am going to need both of these, so let's do this. For these first three dip switches right here. So we'll be using these three initially for the kernels. And let's go ahead and do that. So basically these three numbers right here, the 000, are going to match up with those three dip switch settings. Let's go ahead and change to the second ROM. And the Evo has a nice reset switch for that. By the way, you notice that the background was black, right? I did that to kind of go and match with the color codes, just for, helps me keep track to match the Commodore color codes, the background. Not necessarily for the best legibility. Like I said, this is just for test purposes. I would not run production with this. In production, obviously, you'd have all sorts of different kinds of ROMs. You know, maybe if you own Jiffy DOS, or, you know, Jaffy DOS, or Speed DOS, or any of those, and you would just have one instance of the Commodore 64 ROM, and maybe even include an open ROM or something like that. So, white background. So this is the second ROM right there, and let's go ahead and switch now for the next one. We're going to bring down the first dip switch and bring up the second one, which equals 2. Hit the reset switch, and there we go. Now we should have red, and you can follow along, you know, with the keyboard color codes, which you can see in the image. I just realized that. Well, maybe I can fix that. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. All right, so we're on red now. Next one. So binary 3. So now we're going to. By the way, binary 3 is not the same as keyboard 3, right? Because the color codes for black is 0, 1 is white, 2 is red. So I guess you can make the argument, you know, either way is fine. You can number them 1 through 8 if you want to use the numbers on the keyboard as reference, or you can do 0 through 7 if you want to be true to the dip switch. You know, it just doesn't really make too much difference. Okay, so cyan should be the next color, and it is. That's an interesting blue and cyan together, right? Okay, so for the next one, we're going to bring up, so we should have the next color, which should be purple, and it is. Okay, then add 1 to that, and again, I forgot to mention, you'll notice that the 3 numbers over here is changing. The address is changing, so this ROM is loaded into A000, and the dip switch setting is 101, which you can see right there, 101. Okay. So that's green, and a couple more. Now, to be completely safe, you may want to power down the machine when you do this. And instead of just doing the reset and changing the dip switches on the fly, I think that's much safer. So don't do what I do. Do what the documentation says. You know, just in case, you know, you zap something. You know, it'd be safer to do it that way. But in any case, oh, this is a familiar screen, right? It's because it's 6. You know, the color code for blue, the blue background, which is basically the default. Commodore 64 kernel colors. But again, you can move these around in any way you want. And we have one more. So we're going to add just the very first bit. So here we go. So binary, now we have 7. And so that should be yellow. And it is. So, and there's our binary 111 for the 3 dip switches. This particular kernel ROM is loaded at E000. So everything is lining up okay so far. I'm going to go ahead and actually shut it off and bring those back. Actually, you know, we'll put it on the default. Why not? On the default C64 colors, right? Let's do that. Okay. There we go. Okay. And the next thing we're going to do is move on to the next dip switch number 5 in this case, right here. And that'll start changing the basic ROMs. Right now you can see it says ready. This is actually the default basic ROM. But if I go ahead and move that and then hit reset, just move the 4th dip switch over from the right, you'll see it says RDY-2. You know, that was just an easy way to edit the ready prompt. I would not, again, this is just for testing purposes, not for production. Should not really be messing with the ready prompt, because probably some programs will require and look for the string ready. I'm guessing, but that's probably a safe bet. Okay, so that's ready too. So if we bring down to the next option, bring down, back down, and the next dip switch up should now be ready 3. And finally, since we have 4 basics installed, and of course they would be different basics if there are that many. I don't know how many options there are for basic, but there are different types of basic out there. And then that would be ready 4. Okay, so clearly, so far, all the basics and all the kernels are working. That's good news. I'm going to bring those back down. So we'll bring it back down to the default Commodore Basic. So everything looks like a normal Commodore 64. And now we'll get into the character set. So for the character set, it's going to be the last 3 dip switches, right? So because we have 8 character sets. And the first one is the normal default. And I actually I'd have to look at the notes and see what I put in here for default character sets, but just try to find stuff that would look different. And these are kind of interesting. They change right on the fly. That was a subtle font change that you saw there, right? And let's bring up the next one. Yep, so you can see that's a different character font there. And then one more. Yep. And so we'll go through. Let's see, how many more do we have to go through? Oh yeah. So we got those 2. So we bring these down. Bring this one up next. The last dip switch. That's kind of nice. I like that. Okay. You might have different character fonts for different country alphabets. Then there's one more. And then finally, that should be the last one. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and restart it anyway. There it is. Okay. We have verified that all the character sets work, all the basics work, and all the kernels work. So that's great. And last but not least, I am going to shut the computer off for this one. There is right here a jumper. So this jumper is on the JTAG header, and this will enable the cartridge capability of the so in other words, the diags and the games. Okay, and This jumper, instead of being vertical, is horizontal on the two leftmost pins of the lower pins of the header. In that option now, we should have, and if you remember, the first diag was the 586220, I believe. We'll bring all the dip switches back down, because now basically it reuses the same dip switches for the diags and for the games. Okay, so we start out with all the dip switches in the off position. Okay. All right, so there's the 86220. I don't have the harness hooked up. Probably should. But we'll go through this quick, and I'll just bring the opening screen here real quick. And yeah, we're going to get a couple errors typically on U1 and U2 on the CIAs and also on the SID. Yeah, and because the harness is not installed. Okay, so you guys know that. Okay, so let's bring out to the next one, the next diag. So I just brought the dip switch up one. Should be the plus, which is basically an I think it's an earlier version of the same diag, but it has some changes that are more compatible with some machines, possibly the SX64. I actually forget which one is the most compatible one of those two. Okay, so that one clearly works. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through the entire diag. And the third one should be, I believe, a keyboard diag. And there it is. So it's really, really nice having these diags right on the machine, so you don't even have to load them from cartridge. And the next one, this one, by the way, requires a harness as well, so it's going to give folks some errors here. Yeah, and it doesn't, as you can imagine, it doesn't understand that kernel. It's saying that's not the original kernel, but I do like this diag because of those beautiful color bars, which is really nice to look at the video. Okay. Next one. Here we go. This is a nice diag as well, and has some video patterns and stuff. Again, no harness is installed, so we're going to get some errors and some ROM check errors as well, because it does not understand this larger ROM. That's actually going to be a challenge. Fortunately, the 586220 doesn't mind these big ROMs, so that's good. But not all the old diags are going to work exactly as you'd expect, because there's going to be some different types of ICs that from what they were on the original boards. So let's see, the next one, I'm going to go through this, try to go more quickly. And yeah, that's the SID test, the Cybernoid, and there we go. Okay, and it works. Okay, next one. Next one should be that Tool 64 micro application, I believe. Yeah, I don't know much about this one. Just looking for something to load here. Not quite sure what that does. And the last one is going to be Yanni World, the excellent 1541 diag. And let's see, do I have a disk drive? Yeah, SDI. Well, we'll see. Is that going to work? Yeah, there we go. Okay. Got a directory in there. And we don't want to use the format command. Okay, so that is nice. That works. So far, everything is working, and you know we are well up into the coming up on the 3,000 range, 30,000 range rather, 30000, where now all the games are loaded. Okay, now. What was the first game? Was it Attack of the Camels? Let's see. Okay, so I've returned all the dip switches to the home position, and the first three were for the. My finger's covering that up. Okay, the first three, as we just saw, were for the diags, right? So now let's bring up dip switch, the fourth one over, dip switch number 5. And it should be, yeah, Attack of the Mutant Camels, I believe. Yeah, Jeff Minter. Okay. So the next one, we add the first one, add 1. And that one should be Frogger. Yes. Yeah, I think this is, did Andrew Chalice do this, the port to the 64 of this? He also did that excellent SID test utility, SID tester. This is great. This is a lot of fun. Okay. I can't play right now, right? It's too tempting. That's why I don't have the joystick hooked up. I'd start playing. All right, next one should be Galaxian. So we bring down the 1, bring up the 2. And there it is. Okay. Yeah, I couldn't resist. Okay, there it is. And the next one's going to be Mario's Brewery. So let's look at that one. Bring the 1 back up. Yep. Excellent. So far, that's great. Next one should be Pac-Man. Okay. So for that one, we need to bring the first 2 down, bring up the third one in binary. There it is. Next one is Pitfall. So we bring up the 1. And there it is. And a couple more. Next one is Space Action. This is a Defender clone, and this is a really cool game from Sweden, I believe. I was not familiar with this one until I saw it, but great graphics. A little demo mode here. Okay. And then the next one is, the last one is going to be Tanks, which is kind of one of the early simple games. And for that, I'm just going to bring up the last dipset switch. So now we have the 4 all the way up. 0, 2, 4, and 8. And there we go. So there it is. So those were all the ROMs that we loaded. If I had the larger ROM installed, then we would use the next set of switches to keep going up into the 16K games, for example, or 16 game utility. So I'm hoping that this is helpful, particularly the bit about the tools to use to make these ROMs. One last thing I wanted to show. Oh yeah, let me just put it back into normal computer mode instead of diag and cartridge mode. There we go. So the last thing I wanted to show is on the Evo documentation, basically the Evo64 ROM management option. We'll talk about basically the exact same process of building, and in this case of using the eprom software to build your master ROM images, right? So you can see that the enable cartridge ROMs, which is this one right here, my yellow jumper there, that's basically what I was switching to enable the diags and the cartridge ROMs right there. Also, there's a really nice printout with the different kinds of ROM chips you could use, and also kind of an example of what you could load. Like in this case, you'll see there's Jiffy DOS and OpenROM, etc., and different types of kernels, different kinds of ROM files. You just have to make sure, if you use OpenROMs, to make sure that you match the OpenROM, with its corresponding basic and character set as well. And how to program your own EPROMs, really into great detail, really superbly written documentation about the programmer, how to use it in Windows, the alignment, etc. And the type of ROM that's critical, that you make sure that the type of ROM and manufacturer of the ROM is exactly correct with what you're going to use. Yeah, the AM29F040B is, I believe, will be the default that you'll be using. But if you have other 32 DIP 32 EPROMs, they probably should work, especially if they're the ones that are listed here, in the screen here, the 27C 010, 020, 040, and 080 series. Yeah, some of those are regular UV light erasable EPROMs, right? I was using EEPROMs, or in this case a flash EPROM, to cut down on the time, so I didn't have to UV erase it, and makes things go a little faster. Okay, and the same thing I was talking about, the clear buffer with default option, so you don't overwrite as you add your files one onto the next, on top of each other into the different locations. And they have a handy chart here with the locations of the EPROM memory address, which basically mirrors what I had on the screen on this demo kernel here. And again, combine, put all your date, as you see here, alphabetize rather, not date, alphabetize your ROMs that you're going to use in order, and it'll either create separate directories or put them all in one directory, but use put them in the exact order that you want to use. Not that you can change it in the tools that I showed you, but it still makes it clear to write your EPROMs that way. I think that's about it. You can go into more detail, and it shows exactly what your screen should look like, that you saw that earlier, and how to burn it. As an example of a 27C801, for example, EPROM. And yeah, there's that master sort of spreadsheet that you can actually add your own, add your own games that you have and your own ROMs that you have into there, and kernels, etc., that sort of thing. And that's it. So again, this is SX64 Man. If you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful, please give it a like. And that's it for now. And see you at the next one.